But you didn't post anything?
All right,
Yeah.
we are live from 28 Pittsburgh Street, third floor, room 306, the Hartland Christian School. We are in U.S. history, and we'll go to where we left off with the War of 1812, I believe. And my question to start today is, who won the War of 1812? Raise your hand. Do not just look and think, ah. Question of the day to start our proceedings is, who won the War of 1812? When we talked about the Revolutionary War, we had a treaty, and there were conditions on that treaty as the men met in Paris. When we talked about the other Treaty of Paris, the French and Indian War, they met, and there were conditions. That's how it works. When there's a war, when the combatants are done fighting, the diplomat, yes. You're going to take it later? You have to study off sometime? Activity period?
Yeah.
Hopefully, so you don't miss it. They get together and diplomatically work out a resolution via a treaty. You'll notice in the Treaty of Ghent, it says unconditional end of war. What does that mean? What lands did America gain as a result of the War of 1812?
New Orleans.
What? Did we, or did we already not have Louisiana?
I don't know.
Louisiana Purchase, 1803.
We had a battle there. We didn't.
What lands did we lose?
That's what I meant.
What were really the gains or losses after this warring for 2 or 3 years?
Pretty sure.
So the answer is,
That's the answer.
did we win or lose? Why?
Because it says on the board of America.
What were the okay? Because it says on the board America with 2 exclamation points, right? So tangibly, you know what that word means? Tangibly,
Able to touch.
not theoretically, not abstract, like land that you can touch. So there wasn't a victory that way. But the victory for America in the War of 1812 was this. Here you had this country still in its infancy that had gained its independence from the supreme power called Great Britain. And when Great Britain, the big brother, so to speak, comes calling again, we were able to stand them, to hold our ground, and if you want to call it, be victorious, because they didn't accomplish what they wanted to accomplish, then we won. And America's in 2 exclamation points, because the result of that wasn't necessarily tangible, but wow, did it go a long way in what's going to start becoming a more rapid growth of the country that's going to become the most prosperous, greatest country in the world. Does that make sense? We are feeling our oats. Have you ever heard that phrase before? No? No one's ever heard that phrase before? Feeling our oats. In other words, we're like, the horse that's just eaten. We are ready to go, energized. America, after the War of 1812, we just beat the British again. We're going to take off. Yes?
So if the Battle of New Orleans was in January 1813,
Yeah. They didn't know the war was over. What are they doing?
and it was like the treaty was in 1814.
Yeah. Weird. Because the message hadn't got to them yet. All they had to do is text. Hey, Colonel Jackson, war's over.
Get wrecked.
Yeah.
Wrecked. LOL. Get wrecked.
America, growing, exponentially growing, not just physically, not just growing by moving west, the pride, the good feelings. This part of history is actually called, historians dub it, the era of good feelings. That's not my, that's like in history books all over the country. This is known as the era of good feelings. Post War of 1812. America has arrived. We have our independence. And now we're starting to exert ourselves on the world stage. James Monroe is the fifth president of the United States. He comes on the scene carrying on the Jeffersonian legacy. He's going to be a two-term president. Boy, is he going to be a two-term president. In his re-election bid in 1820, one electoral vote against him. It's almost like Ronald. It's even better, actually. Reagan, 49 out of 50 states, 1984. James Monroe, he's got it going on. America's got it going on. America's feeling really good. Monroe is very popular. I don't think historians are going to look at 2021 the way they do 1821. I don't think they're going to call this the era of good. You? Like 50 years from now, go to your history book. Era of Good Feelings, Part 2, 2020. Probably not. The Federalist Party is gone, like officially gone. There's no more official party called the Federalist Party. Their influence has been waning, and now they're gone. Why do I have this up? I'm just trying to give you all the highlights of this part of history, because we've got 3 days to get to the Civil War, 2.5 now. The Rush-Bagot Treaty, 1817. It's what establishes this border. Have you ever noticed how straight the border is from the Great Lakes all the way to the Pacific? How peaceful that must have been as America expanded west. The border between us and Canada is just a straight line, right along the same parallel. If you look at all the other borders, and you look all around the world at borders of countries, and there's a few places where there's straight lines, but for all those hundreds of miles of border between Canada and the U.S., a testament to the peaceful establishment of both countries, starting with this treaty. So there'll be another treaty as we expand west. They'll sign another treaty, but it's just a piggyback on top of this treaty. And then they'll keep going west. They'll sign another treaty. It's just a piggyback on the original Rush-Bagot Treaty. Disarmament in the Great Lakes. Think about it. You think about world history and all these countries fighting with each other, and that's how borders get made. Look at these. These are very important lakes right here. Isn't it kind of weird that we don't learn in American history about all the wars that Canada and America had? Never thought about that, did you? Like, where's all the wars that between Canada and America for this vast land we call North America? And look at this, the vital waterways that are the Great Lakes. It's always been just a peaceful expansion for both countries and move west. Florida, what was going down in Florida? State yet, you already knew that. It wasn't one of the original colonies. Even in 1820, it's still not going to be a state, but Florida is going to be ceded, C-E-D-E-D, to the United States. Florida is the place where pirates, escaped slaves, renegade natives are having their way. One way to escape slavery in the United States was to somehow make it to the north, right? You've all heard of that with the Underground Railroad. Another way back then was to go to Florida. Then you're out of U.S. jurisdiction as well. Native Americans who have been displaced, but they're like, no, we're not putting up with this. So smaller groups of Native Americans, they're in Florida. Every once in a while, we'll go up and ambush, say, some Americans. And pirates. Colonel Jackson, hero of the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans, has become a very popular military leader in the South especially, and to put it as concisely as possible, there was a conflict in Georgia between the Americans there and the Native Americans, and Colonel Jackson crushed the uprising, including executing 2 British soldiers. That could cause a problem. Jackson did. The 6th president, his job before becoming president was Secretary of State at this time. What a deal. Look at this deal. Yesterday, didn't we determine that it was about 100 times that you take the dollar and multiply it by 100 if you want to compare what things cost then and now? If someone was to tell you, knowing what you know now, that the United States was able to purchase the land we call Florida for $500 million, would you think that was a good deal? 500 million for all of Florida? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So now, as a result of that, again, era of good feelings. America growing geographically and growing in status and pride. Growing and growing and growing. Notice the influence of Spain still. That's a vast area in the southwestern of what we now call the United States. Notice Florida's not dark green, it's just light green. It's kind of like think of it like a territory of the United States. Although so is west of the Mississippi, and they have that dark green. So Florida not quite officially owned by America, but while the rest of the territory west of the Mississippi purchased is literally owned by America, Florida at this time has been ceded to America, but we don't own Florida. Does that make sense? Growing, we do it every day. Any Barney fans? Each day we grow a little. Oh. You guys are so quiet. Any questions, comments? Who's John Q. Adams? John Quincy Adams? Who's that? Yeah. Yeah. It is his son, in case you were wondering. Who's going to become the 6th president? Well, we really don't have time to dwell on John Quincy Adams because of what we're doing here, trying to get this done in a week. We're going to talk more about this Monroe guy and a very, 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 did I say very significant moment in American and actually world history. In 1823, President Monroe laid down the Monroe Doctrine. And it basically said this: hey, Europe, including Great Britain, including Spain and Portugal and France, we're not going to come across the Atlantic and mess around in your affairs. Now hear this. We don't need you coming over here intervening. It doesn't say America, does it? You're not to come and intervene in the Americas. In other words, hemisphere, we got it. You take care of whatever you're doing, you're up there. When it comes to the Western Hemisphere, when it comes to these huge chunks of land, America will take care of whatever needs taken care of here. Pretty bold. Remember I said, I used that phrase, America's feeling its oats. America has arrived, not just growing as a country geographically within our borders. America has arrived in status throughout the world. The world is taking notice, and James Monroe says, there's a new sheriff in town, and it's America. Spain, we know you've been having trouble maintaining your holdings here in the New World, your colonies. That guy Napoleon has been a thorn in your side. In fact, Napoleon has defeated Spain. Spain, you're no longer welcome to come over. You're not meddling in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. Pretty bold, isn't it? It's a very significant time in world history. We gained our independence from the greatest empire at that time. Again, a decade before this. And now we're saying this part of the world is ours. America's feeling good. U.S. controls the Western Hemisphere. It'll be on there tomorrow. Just skip a couple lines. All right. From Washington and the Federalist to Jefferson and the Anti-Federalist to what's known as the Jacksonian era or Jacksonian democracy. America is going to continue to grow geographically, but we're also going to continue to grow democratically. What do we mean by that? Well, let's see. There's a word that has negative connotation if you study world history. Usually when you hear the word nationalism, it's like a buzzword for, nations are going to go to war with each other. Nationalism is used when you study World War I and World War II. What happened? Why did we get engaged in these awful wars? First of all, it was the war to end all wars. Well, that wasn't true because just less than 20 years later, we were at it again in the Great War. Why? Well, historians say because of nationalism. My country's better than your country, and my country deserves more land than your country. That could be a bad thing, right? Notice that nationalism is different than patriotism. But both patriotism and nationalism are part of the landscape in the 1820s. This era of good feeling. Again, we have asserted ourselves on the world stage, and internally, we're it, and we know it. People like Henry Clay, John Calhoun, John Quincy Adams, Daniel Webster. Just to remind you of those great leaders of this time, we can't get into each of them individually. 6 states have been added: Louisiana, Indiana, Mississippi, Illinois, Alabama, and Missouri. The National Road has been approved. So the idea of, hey, all these individual sovereign states coming together and agreeing on certain things as a country. Here's an example of it. The National Road, they approved in the federal treasury the funds for a national road, bringing unity to the country. I know you're hoping for that video, but Heritage. But while all this expansion and all this good feelings happening, under the surface, there's something brewing. What decade are we in right now? What decade am I talking about? It's not up there. Take a guess. What decade? Not 50s, not 40s yet. 1820s. Okay, we're talking about the 1820s. Remember the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. Jackson's going to become president in 25 is going to become president. Remember how that works? Elected in 24. But we're in the 20s. We are almost 40 years before the Civil War. But you see something growing. As the nation grows west, you've got an industrialized north and an agrarian south. The industrialized north, which is less labor intensive because of all the industry and the inventions and the machinery, right? You got these factories going, which you need a lot of workers, but not quite as labor intensive as cotton in the south. Plus their excuse for slavery, because it's so labor intensive, we couldn't survive if we had to pay all these people to do all this work. So the heritage, the legacy of slavery, which is again, the excuse for it is economic, right? So when people try, listen, throughout your life in history classes, you'll hear people make arguments, and I always just shake my head. I'm like, okay, yes, you're both right. Like someone will say, slavery was not the reason they fought the Civil War. It was all about economics. Okay, what was the economics based on? Slavery, right? You've heard people say that in your life already? Slavery was not the reason. Well, okay. Maybe not slavery, the idea of it, but slavery, yes, because of the economics of it. Make sense? So no matter how much you try to try to make this reasoned argument that slavery wasn't the reason for the Civil War, yes, the underlying reason for the Civil War was slavery. Even if it wasn't like, hey, we're fighting this because I'm pro-slavery and I'm anti-slavery. No, that's not true. But slavery was the reason for the economic reasons. So people get silly arguments just to prove their right. So how did we first come up with a peaceful expansion to the west? You have the people in this territory called Missouri. They are applying for statehood. We can't get into what all was needed. You needed so many thousands of people. You apply to the U.S. Congress for statehood, and they'll accept you if you meet all of the standards. Well, what's Missouri going to come into the country as? A slave state or a free state? It's pretty much been established that in the northern part of the country, slave is outlawed. But in the southern part of the country, slave is obviously permitted. What's the ramifications if Missouri becomes a slave state? By the way, right now, it's even. There are the same number of slave and free states. So when it comes to the argument, should America maintain slavery as a legal means of an economy, you have, I think at this point it's 11 and 11. It's either 10 and 10 or 11 and 11. Slave and free states. What if Missouri enters as a slave state? Well, what's that mean? That means when they go to vote on things like tax bills or other things that involve the economy in America, the influence of the slave states is now going to be greater because they got 2 more senators. They've got more representatives in the House of Representatives, right? If it becomes a northern state, if it's a free state, then the opposite is true. The North has that greater influence, theoretically, right? Neither one wants to give into that. They're both going to fight to make sure that every new state is according to their desire. So the compromise was, does anybody remember? Missouri is not going to be the only state admitted to the Union. The way they get around this is, anybody remember? What other state becomes a state simultaneous to Missouri? Yeah?
Kentucky,
No?
Tennessee.
No, because those are both considered kind of southern. Maine. If you remember Maine, we kind of lose sight of Maine, like, right? Like, wait, wasn't Maine always? But no, remember Maine wasn't a colony. Maine was an extension of Massachusetts. So Maine now is going to become a state. That solves the problem temporarily, of course, right? What they're doing is they're kicking the problem down the road, right? We don't really want, do we really want to do this right now? Do we really want to fight about this? Like, is it going to get to the point where we're actually going to have a civil war? Well, in 1820, they're like, no, here's what we'll do. We're not really willing to go to that extreme to decide whether slavery should still be part of America. So Missouri will be admitted as a slave state as long as Maine is admitted as a free state. And then at least politically, the politicians can say that they are not giving in. They're maintaining the balance of power, not really quite ready to go to war over it. So you got nationalism, sectionalism, sounds like a test question. Under Jacksonian democracy, the three templates, the three ideas behind Jacksonian democracy are nationalism, sectionalism between North and South, and democratization. Aren't we already a democracy? Why would America need further democratization? Anybody got one reason? Yeah.
Too much power for the government.
Okay, so a lot of people still think there's too much power in the central government, right? The national government, there's still an argument, yep. What else? What about when it comes to voting? Does America in the 1820s, in your view, need to be further democratized? This idea of democracy, people rule, right? Again, I think I already talked about this, the silly argument people have. America is not a democracy, it's a republic. And they actually argue, like, okay, it's a representative democracy, it's a republic. We are both the same at one time, right? We are built on the principles of democracy, that the people rule. We are a special kind of democracy, representative democracy, which makes us a republic. We don't directly vote for, like, they don't call Mr. Franken when they're going to have a law that they want to present to Congress and ask my individual vote. No, that would be ridiculous, right? 330 million people. You have over 200 million voting eligible adults. You're going to get all of their opinions. We have people represent us. So we are a democratic republic. One of the first parties in the country was called Democrat Republican. Remember that? It was like both words combined. Because that's what we are. Anyway, voting rights. We're all adult, white males. Wait, what was it before that? Obviously, you know that women didn't have the right to vote yet. Obviously, you know that blacks didn't have the right to vote yet, nationally we're talking. What was it before that?
Didn't it have to be like has to do with how much property they own?
Right. At the beginning of the country, property owners voted. Is that okay? Anybody think that's okay? Derek's like, why? Why would you think that would be okay? You're like, I guess it's not bad. Right. What would be the reasoning? Let's say you're like, that's terrible that only property owners had a right to vote. if you think that, and you try to look at the other side, what would be the reason that the founders had that only property owners had a right to vote? If you can possibly think of a reason, a good reason. Would America stand for it today? You guys are hesitating. Would Americans stand for it today that only property owners get the right to vote?
No.
Obviously not, right? But when I said it, Derek was like he thought maybe it wasn't that bad. Listen, if you think you have a future in politics, don't go up to your first speech and say, only property owners have the right to vote. You're not going to win. You're going to be eliminated right out of the gate. So why would it have ever been thought of as an okay thing? Is there any reason for it? Yeah.
Because if you had property, you had money, or more money than other people would, and you would able
To do more stuff, maybe. Yeah. Verity?
Because if you had property, you'd be more qualified as a citizen.
You're more qualified as a citizen. Wow. That's classist. I'm not saying you believe that. I'm saying that's what their belief was, right?
Like, you're more established, like, you have more ability to be able to make your way in the world. Like,
I think those are all true. Yeah?
And that's affected by the laws put in place.
You'll be more affected by the laws put in place. Or you might, another way of saying it is also you have more stake in the laws that are going to be passed. So why would someone, if the laws are generally, I mean, what are most laws? They affect us all pretty much directly or indirectly financially, right? So why would someone that isn't really going to be directly affected by some tax or something, why would we give them the right to vote? For instance, are most people in America rich? First of all, compared to the world, you might say yes, but do most people consider themselves rich? No, right? You heard about the 1%, right? That there's this 1% who controls everything. Just lost my train of thought. Today in America, the 99%, if it's true that the 1% control all the wealth, which isn't true, but let's just say it was. The other 99% get to make the laws to tax those people? Does that make sense? Like we think it does, right? But to them it wouldn't make any sense. Why are the people that don't have, that the laws aren't going to affect them as much, that don't have as much at stake, why would they have a right to vote?
Teachers in Stephen School, another announcement to make. Golf has been canceled for the senior, so that means golf and soccer are both canceled for tonight.
I got a text.
There's certain sports that you never get that much.
What?
There's certain sports here that you would never hear that much. Never mind.
Yeah, golf kind of drives me
Never
crazy.
mind.
They canceled
Golf
for
gets
the.
canceled over late drizzle.
It's terrible.
Get this, speaking of the expansion of democracy, look what happens. Andrew Jackson's elected in 1824. Just one election later, the turnout doubles. It doesn't just grow, it doubles. Twice as many people voted in 1828 than did in 1824. That is an expansion of democracy. And by the way, Old Hickory, with all of his crassness, all of his abrasiveness, all of his, he doesn't care what anybody thinks, all of his mean tweets, I mean, all of his is still very, very popular, obviously. Double the turnout. For Old Hickory. You either love him or hate him. Kind of like 45.
They're funny.
Oh,
And then they'll unfriend you.
well, the problem is I don't want you reviewing mine.
I've never seen
Beat it
I
off.
don't understand. I don't know how it works. I can't see anyone's,
I can't see it canceled.
Yeah,
What's gonna happen is it's gonna look like this the rest of the day. It's not gonna start ready. Mr. Shrew's gonna look like that. I'll put money on it.
You might be coming.
It's been just the weather.
Ready, John? Let's go.
John
Request coming in.
Boy.